everyone. We have with us Ms. Corien Vermaak from CISCO, Sydney. Corien, thank you for being with us. She will now speak on how to create a cyber resilient culture. Over to you, Corien.
Thank you very much, Madam Greta. It's been a tremendous pleasure to join everybody today. I'm in the process of sharing my screen. You should all have the ability to see what I'm sharing at the moment. Visha, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see? Good. Okay. Let's quickly have a look at the two topics that I have been asked to present today. The one being how to create a cyber resilient culture, which I think is a tremendously mature topic of conversation. Because if we understand that the perimeter has switched to the people that we employ, then we are smart against what we're seeing in the industry. Then we're going to take a quick 15-minute break, and then we're going to have a look at the board members checklist. And again, when I was asked to present on this, initially I was slightly baffled, but I found the topic tremendously challenging to put together, and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Greta did a tremendous job in introducing me, but I want to spend 2 minutes on some of my background. So when I speak authoritatively about things like legislation, that everybody on the call understands where I come from. I call myself a tech law enthusiast, but for lack of a better word, I have a master's degree in information technology law, and I specialized in the disciplines of cybercrime legislation and digital privacy before becoming a technologist. So yes, I became a technologist because a firewall engineer told me, Corien, you won't understand it, it's too technical. And as you will gather through the run of this morning from my personality, I didn't take kind to that gesture. I've consulted to the African Union, Interpol. I'm a qualified digital forensic auditor and an ISO 27001 lead auditor. But my number one title is mom, and therefore I've trained over 48,000 children on digital privacy across my native continent of Africa. I am currently residing in Sydney, Australia, and looking forward to doing the same here. Let's quickly have a look. Cyber resilience as a culture. I think this is, again, as I mentioned, such a key topic to understand. But where do we start? Let's start with the word resilience. Because before we can create resiliency, we need to understand what we're actually asking of our people. And I find it really interesting when we look at the definition, because it talks about in the person able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. And out of that, I draw something very specific. And when I did the research for today, I also looked at how the Hindi language actually represents this word of resilience. And I found that tremendously beautiful. But we have to have a moment on this withstand and recover concept before we even go to the culture. Effectively, if we're talking about a business resilient culture, we talk about our people and our employees becoming part of our defense, every single one of them. That's the first part that we're talking about. The second part that we're talking about is the ability to recover. And I think that is very, very important, because both of those together talk to the definition of flexibility, elasticity, and pliability, which the definition of resilience actually talks to. So if we take a step back and we say, we want to set out and create a cyber resilient culture, it's very important to understand. We want to create a workforce that withstand and have the ability to recover. And we're going to look a little bit later on why recovery is such an important part of this concept. So how do we actually create a cyber resilient culture? I think it's very, very important to firstly understand what makes people behave in a certain manner. And again, all of the articles that I cite during the run of today, I'll share. So there'll be 4 articles that will be shared after as part of the deck. So you're welcome to go read some of the research that I did in preparing for today. But creating a culture that is resilient talks about the behavior of people. And when we talk about the behavior of people, it effectively means we are not happy what we're doing at the moment. We want to change to be more resilient. Therefore, we want to reprogram our people. This is a really important part of the discussion. And when I close out the cyber resilience, I'm going to talk about how important the nature of a habit, for instance, is when people act on a daily basis, and how that actually and very effectively talk about that reprogrammability that we need to do as part of creating this culture. I found this quote very, very, very interesting. As a result of social and behavior change, programming should always consist in multifaceted strategies, winning people's hearts and minds. This is very important. When we want to drive a cultural change within an organization, we have to win the people over first. Then we have to win the crowd. And then ultimately, we need to shape the environment. And this is really important when we take away all of the complexities in that quote, and we look at really defining the three concepts that drives people's behavior. We start with a question: why do people do what they do? I don't think all of us actually know. But when we look at the psychology research, it's really important that, firstly, all of the research categories have got three main categories in common. The first being the psychology, gathering the individual's cognitive and emotional drivers. Second being that crowd that we have to talk about is the sociology, the determinant related to interaction with families and communities and groups. That's what drives people's behavior. And again, when we look at a resilient culture, we need to understand that people don't act alone. People act in a group, they act in a team, they act with a manager, and they act under leadership. This forms part of the sociology of why people act. And then lastly, the environment. When we look at resilience, we always want to start with the environment. We want to fix, we want to lock down all the devices. We want to put as much technology down as we could possibly do because we want to control the environment. Yet, what does that cause? It causes frustration with our employees. People are frustrated with extremely lengthened passwords. People are frustrated at logging in 3, 4, 5 times onto different portals. And therefore, we don't change their behavior, which is why I circle back to really looking at these three facets of changing people's behavior as to what they do. And we're going to talk about that. So very high level, we have to address the psychology. Why do people click on links within emails? We need to really understand that. And how do we change that? We need to look at the sociology, the group's behavior. How do the teams behave when it comes to interacting with the cyber world, with the digital world, on their own devices and on their corporately issued devices? And then we need to look at the environment. Where are people working? And there was such an eloquent question, because I absolutely have to agree with the person that posted the question. There's too little focus on cybersecurity in work from home. On a previous presentation, I said we were all sent home under COVID like naughty school children. But the reality in that being, it was a very knee-jerk reaction. And most of our IT departments had to scramble to get us ready to work from home. And security was sort of the last thing that they thought of. Now, as we see that work from home will be part of our lives for the foreseeable future, we really, as board members, need to go back and ask our IT department, what have you done to ensure that people can safely collaborate while working from home? I think that is the most important question, because again, it forms part of their current environment. So people will not change their behavior if their environment is not conducive to the change or the ask in changed behavior. This is really important. So what are we trying to do when we reprogram people? We're trying to have them look for a puppy, like an artificial intelligence base. We're trying to train them to see the difference between possible malicious activity that's heading their way on their device and the good. Because only in that instance can they start helping us alert, report, delete, and actually action as a front line with a culture looking at the greater resilience of the business. So let's quickly think about what is our statistical threat. 81% of breaches leverage weak or stolen passports. This is really important. And even though this is a slightly older report, it still is prevalent to realize that something as elementary and as old as a password still contributes to 81% of breaches that we see in the corporate infrastructure. So I want to briefly walk you through how would one of these attacks work, and why is the person so very important? And Toby mentioned it so eloquently when he spoke about what actually happens if all of our data gets shared. Reconnaissance. People have the ability to take your login and your password and start doing reconnaissance as to what your organization is doing. You then have the ability to receive a phishing email with a link embedded in them. I found while being a forensic investigator that some of our most ingenious attacks was the malware was embedded in the unsubscribe button towards the end of the web page, or towards the end of the email. Why? Because what is our first response if we receive a spam email that we probably don't want to get in future again? We want to try and see if we can unsubscribe. And the very smart, as both of my previous speakers have mentioned, these attackers are very smart. These very smart attackers embedded the malware code within that unsubscribe button, effectively meaning ensuring everybody that didn't want the mail and that went as far as unsubscribing to that mail database then had the payload delivered. Yes, once an attack is on the inside of the perimeter, it is much easier to spread across the whole of the network. So when we see these large attacks, it could have been one vulnerable device, one phishing email, one person that didn't have the habit to report that email. It only takes one. And this can effectively mean that there ultimately then is a monetization of this information. Guys, let's quickly circle back. How do we change the psychology, the sociology, and the environment of our staff to create a business resilient culture, a cyber resilient culture? So I'm going to be focusing on this and giving some key steps. The first being the psychology. What is one of the key drivers of the human psychology? Believe it or not, outside of our pyramid of needs is pure survival. We want to survive and we want to do as best as we can. So when you assess a training campaign or an awareness campaign to change the habits towards becoming a cyber resilient organization, we have to look at the person's survival rate. We have to look at the need to survive, and we have to stress personal losses. When we make each of our employees accountable and understanding that not only can they personally suffer losses, but they can suffer the loss of employment if the organization suffers a massive attack and has to close their doors. When we have the ability in training to stress this to our employees, we immediately have a straightening of the spine, a sitting up and listening. Because none of us want to lose our employment. None of us want to have our bank accounts emptied. None of us want to have our hard drives wiped. Yet so much training out there is so ever light on talking about a password safety and not clicking on these links. But what they lack is really stressing that first trigger of human behavior, the psychology trigger. The trigger that if you click on that link, not only can the organization suffer, but your own bank account can be emptied. Because once we enable that psychology session in a we immediately sharpen them up to the fact that next time they see an email that they didn't solicit, ask for, know where it originates from, they will report it to your organization. And that's the kind of behavior that we want to drive. The second thing is concept of sociology. We are social creatures. We do what others do. We mimic, we behave. A very interesting experiment had a doctor's room full of people. And at every 15-minute point, a bell would go off and everybody would stand up and everybody sit down. The first 3 people that entered the doctor's room were told what was happening and that it's an experiment. Thereafter, nobody was told. And every 15 minutes, a new person would come in and they would see this behavior of everybody, when the bell rings, standing up and sitting down. And the next person would enter and they would join in. If the bell rings without explanation, nobody has explained to them why they're standing up or sitting down, they would stand up and sit down. And I think that experiment really stresses this social nature of how we interact together. Each of us form part of a team. We form part of a bigger business unit. We ultimately form part of a large organization. But if we don't see our role in that bigger ecosystem, that is where we are unable to drive cultural changes. So it's really important when we look at these awareness campaigns that we gamify it. We have the ability to have teams play off against each other because it creates a fun and intuitive culture as to my peers are doing it. And therefore, I also want to see what it's about. I also want to be part of reporting the phishing campaigns that comes in, doing these kind of analogies, because not only do I act in the greater interest of the team, but I do what my peers do, and I thus feel part of something. So when we look at creating a cyber resilient culture, we really need to address that sociology part. The last part is the environment. And as I mentioned, some of my previous speakers also mentioned, our environment has changed vastly. A year and a bit ago, IT departments, technology departments, and CISOs had control over the environment. You would come to the office and you would neatly sit behind a very large firewall, and we would protect you as part of the building. Yet, we are now all working from home. And in this work from home, we are many times reliant on a home provisioned internet link. So our environment has changed vastly. Not only do we secure the device that we're working on, we also secure some of the practices in this environment, ensuring passwords not shared, ensuring that emails are sanitized. And Professor mentioned it so importantly, that hygiene in this environment is one of the most important things before we start anything when it comes to creating a cyber resilient culture. We now have this environment on a multitude of devices used from home on an internet link or an uplink that the company doesn't necessarily own. This poses us with tremendous challenges when it comes to it. However, if we address this environment and make it part of how we create awareness, people will bring that knowledge of being safe, cyber secure, and digital private home. They will bring it home and they will own it as part of your culture. And that's what we want to do. We want to drive that environment to really promote the discussions around how do I become secure. So let's quickly look at this and recap at high level. Why do people do what they do? We have 3 key behavioral drivers researched from a psychology point of view. The first being the actual psychology. When we look at driving a resilient culture, we have to appeal to self-preservation. We have to, in our awareness, not only stress the company's assets, but the individual's assets. We need to enable parents to take a positive message back to their children to be safe online, to ensure that they use devices smartly. When we do that, we empower our people to drive this culture of resilience. The second part is the sociology. We are part of families, we are part of teams, we are part of business units, and we are part of larger organizations. When we jointly drive the message that we can, I can, we can, we start creating that culture. And when you look at cultural studies within organizations, most of them say that positive reinforced cultures are driven within the teams. It takes pride within the teams to say, we haven't been hacked and I have played a critical role in that. Why? Because I'm alert and I report if I see something out of place. And it goes to controls. And I want to go back to controls within ISO, for instance, that says if you see somebody entering the building, Toby so eloquently said the example of the telephone being left at the bar. If you are aware of a co-employee that does that, something needs to be alerted. That person is not responsible with their devices. But in a similar note, if we transition back to the office and we see somebody that we've never seen in the office before, walking around, looking at computers, sitting down at desks where other people are sitting, it is critical that our people would be alerted to this and they would report this kind of behavior, because that is how we drive this sociology part of creating a cyber resilient culture. And then lastly, we talk about the environment. And again, to the point, we don't have enough focus from secure work from home. It's very important that we support our staff with the tools and the technology to drive this culture. I'm going to give a nice example. When we look at email security, now I've received an email that is suspicious to me. I don't want to open it. I don't want to look at the attachments. I do not trust this email. Now, what do I do with it? Do I have to open it, to forward it, to send it to IT support so that they can investigate? No, then my organization is not supporting my environment. You get email security that's got a nice little Outlook plugin where you only highlight the email and you click on report and it immediately takes it out, puts it in a sandbox where it can be detonated and investigated by professionals. And once that email is clear, you will be sent back and say, this email is clear and you're welcome to have a look at it. It's just spam, which again supports that culture. If anything is too hard to do, our employees doesn't support it because it frustrates them. So we need to ensure that our tools and technologies are in place to drive that resilient culture, to ensure that backing up is not a frustration, that the device is backed up either automatically or at an interval where it really is easy. When you shut down at the end of the week, please remember to back up your device and there's an automatic pop-up. Your machine will now shut down and the hard drive will be backed up. A lot of this can be automated, which means it makes it less of a frustration on the employee and also then drives that ease of use that contributes to a resilient culture. But what is this culture that we're actually asking for? We're asking of our employees to be good digital citizens, good cyber citizens. That's all we're asking of them. But what is that behavior? We want them to be alert. We want them to sit on the edge of their seat and be cautious as to what websites they access, what adware they click on, what attachments come on emails, where does the email originate from? When we drive awareness campaigns around culture, we need to create that alertness, again, driving to the psychology part. We want them to be safe, be very sure where they save their passwords, teach them to set passwords correctly without frustrating them. If we teach why a password is so important and how to easily set a safe and long and secure password, I see the uptake of passwords being much greater, or strong passwords being much greater than an IT department going, you have to change your password every 45 days and it has to have a capital and 8 characters and 2 funnies and a number. If we are prescriptive versus inclusive, we find a lot more resistance. So we need to, in that safe culture that we want to drive, be consultative and informative to our people when we have these awareness campaigns. And then lastly, we need to cultivate this culture of reporting. Can I report? Who do I speak to if I see somebody on the office floor walking about, sniffing around desks? What do I do with this email that I find suspicious? My machine has been acting up. It's slow, it's tardy as Windows opens unasked for. Who do I report it to and who can help me? Because when our people report things proactively, we have a better chance of responding well. We can have all the technology in the world. If we don't harvest and build and plant and feed and grow a culture of resilience within our organization, we will never be successful. One of the largest hacks I ever consulted on the African continent was one of the large investment transactional banks, which was hacked as old school as you can. A gentleman walked into the reception and he had a coffee stain on his shirt and a coffee smeared TV. He went up to the receptionist and he said, listen, I have the biggest interview of my life. My wife is pregnant. What did he do there? He played on her empathy. He said, my wife is pregnant. I really need this job. Please, can you reprint my CV? I just spilled coffee on it. All the evidence was before her. He looked earnest. He looked neat, clean, tidy, and he handed her a flash drive. He then said, I'm quickly going to go rinse my shirt before the interview. And he ran into the men's room, sneaking out behind the CCTV camera, and the poor receptionist plugged that flash drive in. Within 4 hours, that bank was under ransomware. Had she reported that to say, sir, I will gladly print your CV, but I have to have IT just quickly have a look at this flash drive. She could have stopped that whole hack because she was alert, she knew what was safe, and she reported it. If only all of our employees can do this from a cultural point of view, we can start building and cultivating. As I wrap this up, because I really want to leave some time for questions, I want to just pause at something that's rather important. How long does it take to build this culture? All that we do are habits. When you look at some of the extensive research done by companies like shadowmatch.com about the critical habits that make people successful, it's rather important to realize that it takes over 21 days to form a new habit. So when we embark on this awareness, we have to understand that we're not going to do a once-off training for all employees and send them on their merry way and now they are digitally safe. That's not how culture development works. Culture development works with repetitive reprogramming. We are reprogramming the habits of our people. The habits of quickly opening the mail, the habits of clicking on adware while I'm not on the VPN, the habits, all of these little habits that make up our day-to-day activity on our corporate devices needs to be changed over 21 days. So it's more of conditioning and training and awareness than what it is a once-off big bang approach. When we look at the book, I found this to be so eloquently mapped to what we want to do in cybersecurity as well. There's a book by the name of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And when you look at the 7 habits, it says, firstly, be proactive. We want our staff to be proactive when they see things within. Secondly, begin with the end goal in mind. We need to start driving our awareness campaigns with a target. We want digitally safe. We want to be the biggest digitally safe campaign in India. We want to be a company that has never been hacked. And there are a lot of these claims, but we need to start driving this culture and the messaging within our organization with the end goal in mind. We need to put first things first. Really important, enable the environment with tools. Ensure that people have access to secure collaboration, work from home safely, so that they put trust in the technology organization. If the technology department, research globally has shown that IT is the least trusted department in all organizations. That is the saddest thing. because we as technologists enable organizations. And it is so pivotal that in what we do, they don't trust us. So we should do that smarter. We should put first things first, like user experience. Is it easy for somebody to report a phishing mail? If it's not easy, we need to fix that. And we need to secure their environment so that they can trust us again. Think win-win. Somebody asked on the question base, where do I start growing this organically, or do I just outsource? I think it's such a smart question. Either or, it's a win-win situation. So where you are at the moment, if you have not done extensive work on your cyber resilience, you are still in a good space because you can shape the outcome. If you have done extensive work, but you haven't seen the benefits, you are also in a good space because you've started the process. So we have to create a habit of win-win. We need to seek to first understand, then be understood. We have to have a consultative process. I mentioned this earlier. If we frustrate our people and our teams with the tools and security that we put in place, we will get nowhere. If it is a business inhibitor, then it's not security, because people will find a way to circumvent it. We need to be consultative in our process, and therefore people will want to come to us as security specialists to drive this culture and say, we have an idea for a better user interface. We have an idea to do this smarter. When we do this as an organization, we really drive this culture. We obviously need to synergize. We need to do things better. And there was a smart question as to the platform. Where do we go? How do we do this smarter? Most cybersecurity guys have got over 50 tools that they have to manage and monitor to be effective. That's not necessarily the most effective way to go. We need to synergize, and we need to be smarter as to where we spend resources, and then sharpen the saw. Guys, a cyber awareness campaign never stops. It has to be ongoing with new and fresh messaging, because people get bored. I've watched that video. I'm not going to watch it again. It can't be an annual audit tick box. It can't. In all organizations where I have audited them from an ISO 27001 perspective, I found that the organizations that showed the most resilient cultures are organizations that do this on an ongoing basis, versus an organization that comes the audit cycle, go, everybody quickly watch the video, don't click on phishing emails, don't share your password, please replace your password, have a nice day. It's not effective. We have to constantly sharpen that saw.